Hello and welcome to The Writer's Mindset with me, Christina Adams.
And me, Ellie Betts.
Each week, we're here to help you persevere through the tough times, be your most productive self, and get that work in progress published.
Wherever you are in your publishing journey, we've got your back. Today, we're talking about how to write epic endings. Big shout out to our podcast patrons for all of your support.
As a patron, you'll get early access to episodes, the chance to submit questions for our guests, and access to our bonus series, Healthy Habits.
Healthy Habits isn't your typical productivity advice. We're not here to tell you to get up at 4 a.m. and go for a 3-hour run.
Hell no. We're exploring the latest research to find small changes you can make in your life to be happier, healthier, and more productive in your writing life and beyond.
To start developing healthier habits today, come join our community at patreon.com/writersmindset.
Before we start, I just wanted to let you know that I've got a new course. It's all about how to write brilliant backstories. We're going to take a look at why your backstory matters, the type of things you might need to know, how to avoid the dreaded info dump, and some common things that may impact your characters' lives, such as their upbringing or their work situation. All this stuff, even if it doesn't make it into your book, is really good marketing content. And let's not forget that it will give your characters more depth, helping you with everything from your world building to how much of an emotional relationship your readers form with your characters. And the deeper that relationship is, the more likely they are to keep reading, to read your next book, to read your next series, and to recommend your book to their friends. So if you would like to find out more, visit writerscookbook.com/backstory. And don't forget that podcast patrons get 10% off all our courses at the Writer's Cookbook. Today, we are talking about how to write your book's climax or how to write epic endings. This is a really important part of a book. And if you're the type of person like me, where for like, I don't know, 10, 15, we'll say 15 years, you kind of stopped and started on a lot of projects, didn't get to the end very often, you might struggle with writing that. And there's no shame in that. That's why we're here.
Absolutely, and it's definitely something that I am working on whilst writing my first book. And I hasten to add, using some examples as cautionary tales. Not that we'll name any names here.
Yeah, we don't want to name and shame, but we want to give you examples of things that left us personally as readers or watchers unsatisfied, because it's really annoying. I can't let it go, I'm sorry.
No, don't let it go, because frankly, if you have that epic ending, if you have that perfect climax for your story, people are going to remember it. People are going to like the story more. People are going to come back for more if it's a series. It's very important to nail it as well as you can.
Yes, that's very true. So let's dive into our first tip, which is something that's very important to me and everything that I write. This is something I do a lot. Ellie will be familiar with this, and so will my readers. And if you listen to the show, you'll know that I take a character-centric approach to writing. And that means that when it comes to the climax of any of my books, but particularly if it's the end of a series, I push my characters really hard, like harder than maybe comfortable.
You do like to make them suffer, and it's great. Honestly, it's excellent. It's definitely a good feature of your books.
Thank you. I believe that if your climax feels too easy for you to write, then it's too easy for your characters, which means it's not as satisfying for your readers as well. And also, when you are stretching your characters, then it's going to improve your writing skills and make your book stronger because of it. And you're therefore going to become a much stronger writer, because I feel like what I did in The Witch's Sacrifice, for example, that was, I think the final version was version 3 or 2.5 of the ending. And I pushed Edie as hard as I possibly could, because I knew that there were so many mental and magical barriers, and potentially physical, but mostly magical barriers she had to overcome in order to get the outcome that the family needed, that essentially the world needed to save everyone. And if I had gone with the original version, it wouldn't have been as satisfying to read. I have a dog who wants to crash. So
Millie's just turned up to tell you that you need to make sure your ending's really good. It's important to Millie as a dog.
Yeah. Millie knows a lot about storytelling from all the TV we watch together. Isn't that true? So if it's too easy for your characters, it's just not going to be as satisfying for your readers. I'm sorry, dog. I can't hold you too heavy. There we go. It's not about being super twisty and unpredictable and trying to outsmart everyone. It's not about being the smartest person in the world, because the smartest person in the world is not the one who has the most convoluted plot or uses the biggest words. It's the person who does things clearly and almost triggers that aha moment in your readers.
Absolutely. Yes, I agree. You don't have to have fancy words to make a good story or to make a book worth reading. It's about the characters.
Like, if it's a plot centric book, even then I don't think you have to be super smart with it. And we're going to cover twists and baits and switches and stuff later, but even if you're writing something plot centric, if it's too easy for your main character, even if they're the smartest person in the world, it's still kind of shit. And this actually reminds me a bit of a conversation my boyfriend and I were having last night. We were talking about Marvel and the possibility that they might bring in Doctor Doom to the future films now that Disney's got the rights for Fantastic Four again. And he was saying that in one of the comic book iterations, Doctor Doom defeats Thanos. And I was like, but how? Doctor Doom doesn't have any powers. Thanos is a purple alien. And he said, yeah, but it's about how intelligent they are, and they have to come up with a really great plan and then execute that plan. And that's kind of what you want to do with your books, is you want to give your character that really great plan that shows them to be the smartest person in the world, even though they're twisting themselves into all sorts of different weird, awkward positions to get there.
I like that. I've never thought about it that way before, but just thinking about some of the endings that come to mind when you say that, that makes sense. So you've got to outsmart them. That's really satisfying to read and to watch. You know, it's a good way to do it.
Exactly. And if you think about it, that's kind of what happens in Endgame, which Ellie still needs to watch, because it is the smartest person in the room who defeats Thanos. It's not the person with the most powers. And certainly in the superhero genre, I do think that's important, because it's very easy for it to become all about the magic and powers and look what I can blow up with my mind. And certainly some of it is going to go in that direction. But it is deeply satisfying knowing that someone with very human traits and very great technology and a brilliant mind can still overcome someone like Thanos, or Batman can defeat Superman, that sort of thing. It grounds it, particularly in a genre that is inherently not grounded at all.
Yeah, I know you keep having a dig at me for not watching Endgame or all those the big movies, but I think I got bored of those superheroes. The stuff I've been watching Marvel wise is like Moon Knight, which I really enjoyed, Ms. Marvel, which I really enjoyed. It's those grassroots kind of more relatable characters that I've been getting more out of recently. But maybe I'll watch Endgame and stuff eventually.
I think it's worth watching them, if nothing else, and to analyze how they do it. And because it will make some of the things and the references that happen in the later TV shows make sense. I've seen some of the TV shows. I absolutely adore WandaVision. I've got some posters to go on my wall that I keep forgetting to put up. And I enjoyed Moon Knight. I'm behind on some of the others purely because I'm binge watching comfort shows. But I got bored of origin stories. That was my issue. I like that the stakes are getting bigger and the characters are being pushed harder, because there's a reason that Spider-Man, whatever the first one was, Homecoming, I think, wasn't an origin story, because they knew people were bored of Spider-Man origin stories, right?
Yeah, that particular origin story has been done once or twice. So I can understand that. I don't know, I kind of like an origin story. I like that point where the character goes from their normal everyday boring human life to, oh shit, now what do we do? I've got to deal with these powers, I've got to work out these enemies, I've got to work out how to live in this whole new world, and I quite like that little section.
Yeah, and I think now that they've got more diverse characters, it's more interesting again, because there are different elements to it that they couldn't explore before. And certainly when I read paranormal women's fiction, I do enjoy that element of how they get to grips with their powers and stuff. And a series I really enjoyed last year and finished this year, the first few books were her getting to grips with her powers. And then kind of, if you treat it as like the whole series following your typical hero's journey or heroine's journey, it's probably heroine's journey, you get to like book 8 and that's your big climax with the big bad. And it was so good. Like, the love interest sacrificed himself, the whole town was involved. It was ginormous. But then there was still like 3 or 4 books left, and that ending I found deeply unsatisfying because it was too easy. The penultimate book in the series, like, there's a novelette to wrap things up that I haven't read because I was so annoyed at this penultimate book. There was no big fight scene. there was no real conflict, there was no real pressure. The writing style felt rushed because this person had been rapid releasing one book a month for a year, and I don't even know if that includes her other genres or other pen names. And I can't even tell you how much that ending pissed me off, because I'd invested so much time in reading this series and then it was all solved with a conversation.
Yeah, that's infuriating. When you read, particularly when you read that many books or even watch that many episodes or films, you want the ending to feel like it was worth getting through all that, right? You don't
Yeah.
want all of that to be irrelevant for the ending to just be fixed like that. You
Yeah.
know, that's kind of my next point really. Is I watched a whole series recently which I absolutely adored, and I was mad at myself for not watching sooner because it was so good throughout the series. And then in the final episode, the main character just fixed everything. She didn't have to fight. It wasn't even a physical fight. It wasn't like any kind of mental struggle. It wasn't anything she had to overcome. It just, she decided, no, let's do it like this, and it cut and everything was fixed, and she went off, happened. Well, I don't want to say happily ever after, but she got something that she wanted that was just so out of the blue and just
Happy for
wandered
now?
off.
Would you call it a happy for now?
Yeah, I guess it's a happy for now. I mean, I don't want to give specifics. Like you said, we don't want to name and shame anyone here, even if it is a big company that I'm referring to. I don't want to name and shame, and I don't want to put people off. But I found it so unsatisfying for her to just decide everything was fixed and just wander off into the distance, happy and satisfied, and not having to have fought for any of it. And that was just a fizzle. It wasn't a climax, it was just a fizzle, and that left me very unsatisfied.
Yeah, I can imagine, because I saw the first episode of that TV show that you're referring to, and it did feel easy for the character. Certainly, like there were some great lines of dialogue in it, and I enjoyed that first episode. But certainly, compared to some of the ones in the same genre, what the character went through in that first episode, like they weren't pushed as hard as other characters were, because they wanted to get past that and get into the more genre-y stuff, if you will, rather than the piloty scene setting stuff that always comes with the first episode.
Work through some stuff, so it didn't feel like the ending was going to be that bad. You know, it didn't feel like the ending was going to be that disappointing. But I was very mad. And I have a friend who is also a listener, and I hope he hears this and he'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But we had a big argument, well, a big discussion about it, and he really liked it. And I was just like, how? How can you like this? It's got X, it's got Y. Or should I say it's not got X, it's not got Y, and it's not got Z, you know? And yeah, he still thinks it's great, and I still think it was terrible. And we're gonna probably have many arguments about this ending forever. So if you're listening, you know who you are. So yeah, the main takeaway there is, if you're building up to an ending, any kind of ending, it should be big. Don't just let it fizzle out.
I think that ties really nicely onto our next point, which is that you want to have them overcome something. Like, generally, it has to be their fatal flaw, for example. Like in a romance, it's often someone is afraid of love for XYZ reason, and they have to overcome that with like some sort of big romantic gesture to then get their happy for now or happily ever after. It doesn't have to be a big epic fight scene. I think that can be the misconception. Like, if you're writing some genres like fantasy, particularly epic fantasy, probably does have to be a big fight scene, because otherwise it's not going to feel as satisfying. But if you're writing, like I say, something, I hasten to say smaller, but something more grounded in the real world, then it can be something mental. And that's something that I do in the What Happened In series and also in the Hollywood Gossip series. You know, there are no fight scenes in that. Well, I do have one character get beaten up, but like it's not, that's not part of the climax. That's the main character overcoming, not main character, that's a character overcoming something. And I do think that it is harder to write when you're overcoming something psychological, because being entirely honest, a lot of us haven't overcome our own psychological barriers, and if we haven't done that, how can we write that for our characters?
Absolutely. I think quite often, personally, that mental thing to overcome, that character arc where they've got to face that part of themselves and work through it, I prefer that. I find that more interesting than just a load of people turn up, hit each other, one of them wins, you know? I know that's massively oversimplifying fight scenes, but personally that's not as satisfying as an ending for me. Although quite often it's good, and I don't dislike those fight scenes, but personally, I think I would relate more to people overcoming those internal issues and having to fight that, having to work towards that. It's a satisfying ending.
Yeah, and there is a way that you can combine the two. For example, that's what I did in The Witch's Sacrifice, right? In order to fight, Edie had to overcome her own barriers. It does require a bit of a mind fuck, which is why I would recommend obviously keep listening to this podcast episode and also checking out Sasha Black's book 13 Steps to Evil, because that really got me thinking about how easy I was making life for my characters at the climax, and how if I did the rewrite, even though I didn't really want to do the rewrite, it would be much more satisfying for me and also for readers. And based on the reader response, I do think it worked. Not to brag or anything. That sounded really big-headed then.
It didn't sound big-headed, because you're right, it did work. It was really satisfying ending. There was that build-up almost throughout the whole last few books, as you said. That build-up was there, and that ending felt satisfying as a reader. It felt
what's
difficult.
Even funnier? You know what's even funnier? I didn't plan for that ending, obviously, because I rewrote it. But I realized retrospectively I'd been leaving the breadcrumbs since book one, and I had no idea.
See, your subconscious writer is even better than your conscious writer, and you just don't know.
Pretty much. Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing, is the fact that I'd left these breadcrumbs. So on some subconscious level, I knew I had to do the thing that happens at the end of book 4. And I kind of needed to hear it from Sasha to actually take that leap and go, oh, yeah, I've got to do this. But the hard part then wasn't doing the thing. It was getting them out of that situation and making it hard enough.
I've done that a few times where I've read a sort of writing craft book, particularly when you read someone who's really great like Sasha Black. We're big Sasha Black fans over here. But you read that book and you think, oh, of course you have to do it like that. I knew this. I knew this somewhere deep down. It's not, I wouldn't say it's obvious, but it's one of those things you think, oh yeah, of course. But sometimes just reading it in that format, or just, experiencing, it's not even just reading, sometimes writing courses and stuff do the same thing. You go, oh yeah, of course I have to do it that way. Why wasn't I doing it this way?
Like my backstory course might trigger that kind of thought process.
Oh, I see what you did there. I set you up for that little plug perfectly and completely accidentally, but yes, that's exactly right.
And your backstory informs your character arc, and the character arc you want your character to have should inform your climax, because your character arc is all about these little challenges that they have that forces them to start facing their fatal flaw. And at the end, in the climax, it should be that moment where they overcome that fatal flaw and it's no longer fatal. Or if you're going for something a bit more sad, then maybe that they don't overcome it and it's essentially what kills them or ruins their life in a different way.
Everything's connected. Look, it all makes sense.
Yeah, and obviously you can do a circular arc as well, which is something we've covered in a previous episode on character arcs, but you have to be really careful with that, because that's probably the number one way you're most likely to piss people off.
Yes. Exactly. I actually watched a horror film on Netflix the other day. And again, I'm not going to name and shame because, but at the time I thought, oh, this is interesting. This is quite new. I've not seen it kind of done in this way before. But it had the elements that I thought she was going to have to overcome that internal struggle. She had kind of, I feel like mental health issues is too much of an umbrella term these days, but you know what I mean? She had a lot going on. And I thought that part of the story then was going to be her having to face that and come to terms with it. And in actual fact, it wasn't. The big bad kind of just got, shoved in a incinerator. And so it wasn't that satisfying as an ending. And also, someone she was close with got killed by this big bad, like halfway through or whatever, and that was never brought up again and never mentioned. And she was kind of quite dependent on this person. And then the ending was, I'm fine now, I'm really strong, I can face everything. Well, when did you come to that conclusion? Because was it just the shock of this big bad that made you decide that you can face anything now? It felt really unsatisfying in retrospect, because it was just too easy for her, like you say.
Yeah, if you want a good example of that, because what you described sounds like a bad example of an extended metaphor for mental health, I would highly recommend The Babadook. Not only because it's got one of my favorite actors in, but also because I think it does things like a circular arc, sort of circular arc, and mental health, particularly grief metaphor in the horror genre extremely well. I feel like I need to rewatch it, because I remember watching it not realizing it was an extended metaphor, and then like I read about it after, as a lot of neurodivergent people do, and I was like, oh shit, That's genius. So now I need to go back and analyze it, knowing these things. Because the breadcrumbs were there, my brain just didn't make the connection because it was too busy trying not to shit a brick because it was scary.
Yeah, the Babadook is excellent at doing that. I don't think this film was necessarily going for the extended metaphor thing. I think it was just trying to tick boxes, I guess, is, for
That's
want of a
even
better term.
worse. People
Yeah.
don't like box ticking exercises. No, don't do it.
No,
Make it
no.
work. Work harder, damn it.
Yes, if your main character has mental health issues, then have it there for a reason. Don't have it there for the sake of it. You know, people don't have mental health issues for fun. Like, it's not some like hobby. You know,
True.
my favorite pastime, depression. No, don't do it like that. I think I just broke Christina.
You did.
But
Well, that brightened my bad mood.
we're at that point now. We're joking about depression. That's the
But
state
like
of the
being
world.
totally honest, I am of the mindset that if you don't laugh, you'll cry. So you
Yeah.
can't make jokes. Like I have a dark sense of humor. It's in my books, you know. So you can even see on camera, my eyes are watering from like. Really, your point.
My point, yes. Going back to the points. One of my favorite techniques I've seen recently is tying everything together. So I've spoken about the Dresden Files a few times on this series. I'm a big fan. And when I was reaching the end of that series, it felt like everything from previous books was coming together. And it's like 14 books, 17 books? You'd think I'd remember, I've read them all. But there's things in that ending which was huge and really satisfying, and it felt difficult, and it was like it was actually one of those big physical fights that we talked about, but there were still elements of the main character Harry having to overcome a lot of his internal issues and things like that. But in terms of the fight and everyone coming together, there was stuff that was happening, stuff that was going on that felt like it had been set up in book 1 or book 2. Very well, it's over 10 books then, because I can't remember the exact amount. 15? I can't remember. But there was stuff from way back that felt like it was still important at this ending. And he actually wrote the last 2 books a few years after the ones before it, which is interesting. I don't know if he decided to take the time to do a really good job. Maybe there's some research I need to do on that. But there were lots of elements coming together, and that felt really satisfying. You don't want your ending to feel completely out of the blue. You don't want your characters facing a big fight and they just find like magic weapons from out of nowhere and all these easy things. You know, you don't want, there's a word for it where they have this magical thing that just fixes everything. What's it called? Deus Ex Machina thing. Did I mispronounce that? You know what I mean? You don't want it to be that.
I have no idea how to pronounce it either. I was about to Google it.
That's fair, because you know. But you don't want the fix or the ending or that to just be out of the blue. It makes those earlier books or those earlier episodes or those earlier films in the series feel worthwhile watching. It makes them feel more important, and then having it come all the way at the end is a satisfying ending. It's a good way to do it.
And I think the problem is if you don't put the work in to do some level of planning or thinking ahead, then you are more likely to write yourself into a hole and end up with that kind of, for want of a better way of putting it, an act of God that saves people. Because that's basically what I hate saying it because I don't know if I'm saying it right. Just no, I've no idea how to say it. I'm not going to try. But it is like contrived and unsatisfying and awkward, and it pisses people off. But on the other hand, there are ways to do an open ending well. One of my favorite books, The Storyteller by Jodi Picoult, that's a standalone, and it ends with a moral question. The main character is, cover your ears if you don't want spoilers, but the main character is basically asked by someone she knows to kill him. Like this guy who, long story short, he worked in the concentration camps during World War II, and he's in his 90s. Since then, he has worked very hard to be an upstanding member of society. But the book all the way through leaves these breadcrumbs of like, well, does everything he's done since absolve him of what he did then? And it's a very hard question. And this main character, she's from a Jewish family, but she doesn't identify as Jewish. And she is asked to kill the character, and it ends basically in that scene. You never know if she does it or not, because it's it puts the question to the reader. It's about what would you do? It's not about what the main character would do. And I think that that is something that not many writers could pull off, but that Jodi Picoult's readers do expect, because she does raise a lot of moral questions. She does do a lot of research. She is also from a Jewish family, but doesn't identify as Jewish. And yeah, I think it's just a very powerful ending that has always stuck with me, and I'm notoriously bad at remembering other people's stories.
That's what we were saying earlier, right? If you nail that ending, if you nail that climax, it makes the book more memorable. People are going to think on it years, maybe after they're finished reading it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's been probably nearly 10 years since that book came out, and I even analyzed it for one of my pieces of uni coursework. And yeah, it just really, really stuck with me. Out of all the books I've read, it is one of my favorite books. It's probably the endings that stuck with me the most, I think, are The Storyteller and Gone Girl, because they both fit the genre and go against what you expect, but still feel satisfying and leave you with questions. And I know there are some people who don't like those kind of endings. As I mentioned, my boyfriend hates those kind of endings. After we saw the Gone Girl film, he was utterly fuming at the ending of Gone Girl. But I was like, they can't do it any other way, because it changes the message of the book. And you need to know what your message is, what you're trying to say, what your theme is, because then that helps inform whether or not you have that happy ever after, whether you've got some sort of moral question where it's all cyclical and nothing has really changed and no one has really learned anything, or maybe you've got something in between where some things have worked out for the better and some things have just fallen apart, because that's life.
That is life. It sounds like Jodi Picoult did it really well. There are things I've watched and read that don't do it well, and that's another thing I wanted to mention here, is you can leave it open-ended. If you do it well, you can leave that question on the reader's mind, but don't leave it too open-ended. There was a series I watched recently where it was kind of not exactly a whodunit exactly, but there was something bad going on. They didn't know who did it. There were lots of suspects, basically.
I kind of feel like the way it was marketed, it was a whodunit, though. That I think is inherently the problem. And
Yeah.
I think we should name this one, just because I've read so much about it online. People will figure it out anyway. I do.
Okay. The Netflix did a series called The Watcher, which is based on a true story.
And if you're a fan of true crime, you're already aware of what the story is and the fact it doesn't have a conclusion. And I don't know if you're aware of this, Ellie, but the family this happened to actually told the people creating the show that they could change the ending to make it more satisfying for the audience, and they
Well,
didn't.
yeah. Well, because at the moment, yeah, you spend the whole series thinking maybe it's person A, person B, person C, and they kind of set it up as red herrings all the way through, as it could be any of them. So on the last episode, you were expecting to find out who did do it, who done it, and they don't tell you. They just leave it as if it could have been any of them, could have been none of them, could have been someone completely random, could have been made up, could have been a ghost. Do you know what I mean? Just, probably not a ghost, but you know what I mean? They don't in any way suggest who it could be, and they certainly don't give you the satisfaction of telling you who it was. And also they added a load of stuff in that wasn't real. Like I can't remember the actual true crime story, to be honest with you, but they added all these tunnels under the house, which apparently weren't in the original house.
They're not, no. I'll see if I can find it, but there is a really good podcast that I listen to. We can watch it. It's on YouTube as well, called The Casual Criminalist. No,
yes.
Casual Criminalist. I don't know why that's hard for me to say. And that's how I know about this, and how, even though I've not watched it, I am aware of what happened and how true or not true it is. That, and also I waited because I wanted to see what the ending was from other people talking about it, because I knew there was no ending to the actual story. So I thought, well, how can it be a satisfying TV show?
Yeah,
and it's not.
I binged it all in one day. That's how good the rest of the episodes were.
That's
and then
I
finished it, and I messaged you. I need you to watch Watcher. I finished it, and I'm mad about the ending.
Yeah, I don't want to watch it. Well, there's an element of me that does, although I'm kind of bored of watching crime at the moment. That's why I've been binging Drop Dead Diva is still kind of crime, but not the same. Anyway, just not feeling that kind of thrillery stuff at the minute. And also, like, everything I've heard is just said like it's really good, but then because it's so good, it builds up your expectations, almost like Lost or Heroes did back in the day, and then it shits a brick because they didn't know how to end it.
The cast were great. I really enjoyed the cast. It was like nice and moody. I loved all the it felt really high budget as well, which was nice. And it was like I don't know if drama is the right word, but it's kind of like a really good dramatization of the story. I think that was really well done. I'm just still mad that the ending, they just went, yeah, we don't know who did it. We're not going to suggest who did it. You know, we're not going to take advantage of that creative license and, you know, say X person did it. But yeah, I finished it. I was like, oh, that's disappointing.
Yeah, and I think certainly from what I've seen or read, there weren't any breadcrumbs to help you figure it out either. There wasn't anything to like be, oh yeah, it's probably this person, but we're not going to spoon feed you and tell you who it is. Like there was nothing to help you kind of fill the gap or
Well, it was
um
even worse than that. They kind of suggested it was each one of them in different episodes, kind of thing. Not in that kind of black and white way. It's not like in this episode it's Big Mo. In this episode it's what's his face. I don't think her name was even Big Mo. It was Big something. I don't know. But do you know what I mean? It made out like it was loads of different people. There were red herrings for each different culprit or suspect, should I say, throughout. And then at the end it was just like meh.
that's yeah.
Infuriating.
I don't have words. Like
No words. No words.
no.
Don't do that, lovely, lovely writers, lovely listeners. Don't.
Yeah,
do
because it breaks that trust. It ruins that relationship you've established with your audience, right? And sometimes you can damage that and then it never repairs and that person never comes back to you because you damage that trust so much.
exactly right. Because if you make out like you're gonna reveal who a I don't want to say killer because they didn't kill anyone. Did they kill anyone? I've forgotten it. But
Big bad?
you don't want to spend that whole time as if you're gonna reveal the big bad and leaving red herrings as to who it might be to then not do it. That just breaks the trust, like you say.
Especially when the whole premise of the show or the book is based around that question, whether it is a book or an episode of a TV show or a series of a TV show. If you ask that question at the very start and it is the question that is asked even in the trailer, you have to answer it.
I'm sure I saw on Amazon the other day that they've done a book of the series as well now. And I wonder if it's, don't quote me on this because now I'm questioning my memory, as you know, but I wonder if they've done it literally like scene for scene of the series or if they have actually utilized that creative license and pinned it on someone.
No, I think it will be a novelized version of the TV show because they usually are.
How disappointing. Let's move on.
Like what you tend to get is sometimes more of the psychology and inner monologue, but the general plot points are the same.
Yes, very disappointing. Moving on to our final point then, I wanted to spend some time talking about the difference between a plot twist, which is a good way to end a book, and a complete bait and switch. Now, the two may seem similar, but there are differences in the way that the reader or the audience will respond. So the plot twist, for instance, may come as a surprise when it's first revealed, when it's first read, but in actual fact, the reader will think, oh, that does make sense because you've left all these breadcrumbs throughout the story. And so even if they didn't see it coming, it will make sense upon reveal. Although some readers will see it coming, and that's okay. That's okay. It means you've left some breadcrumbs. Some readers are going to work it out. If everyone works it out, then maybe you've left too many breadcrumbs. You need to pull some of those back, put them back in your little breadcrumb bag. But most people are not going to work it out, and that's good. You don't necessarily want them to. The difference between that and a bait and switch is the bait and switch will leave those breadcrumbs all the way through as if it's going to be that particular ending, and then just change it. It comes completely out of the blue. It doesn't make sense. Those breadcrumbs are no longer relevant. Bad breadcrumbs. And then the reader, or the watcher, I should say, no, not the watcher, the reader, the reader is left feeling like, where the fuck did that come from? Because that's not satisfying then. It doesn't make sense. And there are some big name TV series that have tried this recently, and it's just pissed everyone off. People don't really enjoy the bait and switch. It may feel like clever writing at the time, but you don't want to completely surprise all of your readers. That's, in my opinion, bad writing, because it shouldn't be that much of a surprise. You should be working up to something that feels like it makes sense, not working up to something and then have a big surprise at the end that no one wanted or was expecting.
Exactly. Like you say, it's not clever writing. And the show in question, I do think it's another one we should name because everyone's going to figure it out.
Go on then. We've named and shamed this writer anyway. Oh well.
Oh yeah, fair point.
Different in the books, but
it's a Game of Thrones, and I haven't seen it. I stopped after about season 2 or 3. I struggle with epic fantasy anyway, some people know. And yeah, at the time, I knew a lot of people who watched the show. I worked with some diehard fans, and the sheer level of disappointment coming from those people because of the level of bait and switch and the fact it didn't feel as twisty as what had happened in season 1. Season 1, the twists were done well, and season 6, was it, I think, didn't have as much thought. I don't think. I don't know how much time they had to put it together, but I am aware that the showrunners wanted to move on, and George R.R. Martin would have given them material so that they could keep going, and I believe he offered to help them, and they just wanted to get it out of the way, essentially. And I think that's the same issue that the book series that I referenced at the start had, which was that the writer was ready to move on, and so they rushed the ending.
Which is disappointing. Like, people had invested a lot of time, a hell of a lot of hours in that series, and waiting for the series as well, waiting for the final season to come out, to then be sort of have kicked in the face, so to speak, by the writers. Like, how frustrating, how annoying. That bait and switch is kind of doing a disservice to your readers, because they're expecting a certain thing, they're invested in a certain storyline. To just give them something out of the blue is a massive disservice.
I agree. And I think this goes against a lot of wisdom in terms of sales, but not in terms of creativity and reader loyalty. But you are better off taking a step back from that series than half-assing the ending or making it unsatisfying, because the last thing you want to do is let your readers down, because they are the people who trust you with their money and their time. And if you break that, particularly when someone's invested, 6, 7, however many years, 10, 20 books in you, if you let them down after that scale of investment, there is a high chance they're not going to come back, and they're going to remember that level of disappointment. They're not going to remember how much they enjoyed the journey.
Exactly, and the other thing is, if they hated the ending that much, they're going to tell all of their friends they hated the ending. If they're on social media, they're going to post it on social media that they hated the ending. And then, even though you can't see the power of that word of mouth, so many more people, even if they've not read any of the series, are going to be put off. Your series going to be put off you as an author because their friend Jim hated the series.
Yeah, and we generally don't name bad examples because we know that it is hard enough to get sales as an author. But regardless of whether or not you enjoy a book, someone still spent a lot of time on that. They spent a lot of energy. They might have spent a lot of money on it. And I don't think it's fair to badmouth people, but I think sometimes when they are large corporations and when everyone is saying the same thing, it's slightly different because you're gonna figure it out anyway. So we might as well just tell you, and then you can let us know what you think in the comments or on our Facebook group.
But we wouldn't do that about I would never want to do that about smaller authors, indie publishers and stuff, indie authors and stuff, because it's not fair.
Because
it's a lot of work.
A lot of indie authors are doing it on their own or with a couple of people for support. Then some of these big shows, they have hundreds, if not thousands of people working on them. And I do think some of them should be held to account. They have £1 million budgets and they can't come up with a better plot device or a better ending that makes people happy. I'm fairly sure, in fact, that one of the stars of the show has even since come out and said that was the wrong ending, if not more of them.
I wouldn't be surprised.
But obviously they couldn't do it at the time. They needed some level of distance first because you don't want it to look like you're biting the hand that feeds you. But the fans are loyal to the actors as much as the world. And I almost think that one of the actors admitting that makes the fans like that person more because they're on the same wavelength. And basically everyone just united in slight hatred of the showrunners, I think.
Yeah, because unfortunately people are going to hold it against the writers and the producers, right? They're not going to hold it against the actors.
No, exactly, because the actors were just doing what they were told to. And some actors do get a bit more of a say and they can push back, but it's usually on small things like a line of dialogue or maybe a scene. They couldn't push back on the entire narrative of the whole series and go, this is completely wrong to what we've been building up for the last 5 years. They don't have that level of sway.
No, exactly. So, yeah, cautionary tale.
You do with your books. You do have that sway with your books.
You do. You can do right by your characters. You can do right by your readers.
Yeah. And like I said, I do think it is better to take a break and do something better than to rush it. And that's why I pushed back my launch of not The Witcher's Sacrifice, that's out now, of The Mean Girls Murder, because I could do it for the date I had set, but for a lot of reasons, like the sheer fact that I need to take a break from writing fiction at the moment and take it really at my own pace and not have that pressure. And also the fact that I'd planned to release it in December, which is a really bad idea in terms of when you need to finish things for like retailers and stuff, because usually you have to submit things 2 weeks before the deadline, and I'm not going to have it 2 weeks before. I need that buffer. So yeah, I pushed it back because I still want this book to be as good, or if not better, than The Witch's Sacrifice. And without that time and that headspace, it's going to be a lot harder. But I know that the real fans of Neve and Edie and Ben and Fadil and Maggie and Josh and all of them will wait, because they would rather have something satisfying for those characters, and they value my physical and mental health. It's more
Oh
important to
yeah,
them.
100%. And that's a big thing that we support here, isn't it? Taking care of yourself, knowing what your body is telling you, and doing what's right for yourself and your mental health at the time. Like, your readers aren't going anywhere. You know, they want the book, they want the series, they want the characters, and they want your writing. So they're more likely to support you taking those couple months or so and doing whatever you need to do than, then no one's going to be banging at your door saying, "Where's the book?"
I mean, you might get people saying that, but if you
It's
tell them
me.
why
It's
you're
me.
not
I'm at the
doing
door.
it.
I'm at the door saying, "Where's the book?"
Like, I'll be honest, you may lose some readers because there are people who binge read and then don't connect with you via email or on social, so they don't know what's going on and then they forget about the next book. But your hardcore readers become invested in you as a person, they become invested in your characters as people, and so they are much more likely to understand. And they are also the people who spread the word about your books when it comes out, and it is those types of readers that build a career, not just the people who read casually and then forget about you, which is what a lot of people will do. But if you've got a lot of people doing that, then maybe it's time to think about your approach to writing.
That's a big topic for another day. Jeez,
Yes.
drop the bomb.
Sorry. We'll see you next week.
Bye
No, we
bye.
won't. No, this is the last episode.
Oh my goodness. What a climax for 2022.
Not that we did
You
that
see what I did
intentionally.
there? I think it was intentional, and I forgot it was intentional. I just thought I was really clever just then.
No, it was intentional. Like, for the last 6 months, I've wanted to do it. I've always wanted to end a season on this topic. We've just not got to recording this episode.
And who doesn't love ending on a climax, right?
Exactly. Have a great holiday period, and we will see you very soon.
If you found this episode interesting or helpful, make sure you subscribe to The Writer's Mindset on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. Or all of them, we don't mind.
Everything from a like to a rating to a review to a subscribe to shouting about us on social media helps us to reach more writers so that they can overcome the mindset issues that are holding them back with their writing too.
If you're on social media, come join us on Instagram at Writers Mindset Pod, or join our Facebook group, which you can find by searching for The Writer's Mindset.
And don't forget to come join us over on Patreon for our bonus series, Healthy Habits.
See you next time.
Keep writing.